This recording is dedicated to strategy formulation, and I've broken this into two sections. Okay, so first we discuss strategy formulators, or those tasked with understanding the developmental stage of the strategic planning process. And then second, we focus on the process of strategy formulation by focusing in on specific tools that allows strategy formulators to conduct an internal and external strategic audit, as well as then go on to make strategic choices. We start with this very general slide, and I ask the question, who is responsible for formulating strategy? And here you might recall the tumbleweed moment at your department meeting where top management asked for volunteers to come forward to be part of a strategic planning working group, only for everyone to go running for the hills. I know a lot of people who are exactly that way inclined, but I was sort of different. I always welcomed the opportunity to strategize because I sort of valued the opportunity to take a step back from the day-to-day. But this raises two key points. First, organizations do not uniformly use the same group of strategy formulators. And second, even when there seems to be consistency across organizations on who is involved in strategy formulation, those individuals likely approach the process in entirely different ways. Board members are invariably involved in the strategic planning process, as one of their main responsibilities is often to be involved in helping the organization to establish direction and purpose. But depending on how well you know your board members, this might not always be a skill that is possessed by all. Whelan and Hunger present a continuum of board members based on degree of involvement. At the low passive end of the spectrum, you have the phantoms, okay, who have no degree of involvement in strategic planning at all. And at the opposite high active end, you have the catalyst, who takes the leading role in establishing and modifying organizational strategy. Now, it's important to recognize that you don't want a board full of catalysts, okay? As I can see, you know, as a chair of that strategy planning committee, that would be an unenviable and impossible task. So you want a balance of active, nominal participation and catalyst board members. I say nominal because you might have members on your board who bring very specialist knowledge and expertise to the group, so you involve them in those select key decisions that are pertinent and relevant. Senior level managers are also expected to engage in the strategic planning process as strategists. However, managers, just like board members, demonstrate different approaches to strategic planning. Here, the table details 4 typologies of top managers. For example, you have the strategist, who is tailor-made for this process. But then you also have the steward, who is looking to appease and simply retain a sense of family. Herein lies a problem, because a number of commentators suggest that strategic thinking is not something that can necessarily be taught. Then top-level managers who do not have the capability nor capacity to think strategically can be the source of much frustration. In the first recording of this module, we discussed the if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. Sometimes one of the contributors of that mentality is simply the inability to engage in visioning and future planning. And I must admit that that was one of my major frustrations in my early career as a practitioner. I think I've said before that I'm sort of a strategy geek and I love the idea of strategic planning, but when faced with a line manager who is the complete opposite, it can be extremely demotivating. So what sort of strategist do you think you are? What about your manager? Both are very important questions to answer. Sort of channeling the same line of thought from the previous slide, has it always been the case where you feel the organization that you've worked for had some sort of strategic plan for success? And if so, did you always understand how your specific job was integrated into the organization's grand scheme? One way to raise awareness of organizational strategy and buy-in to the organization's strategic direction is to involve employees in the strategic planning process. process. So employees who are working with the product or service every day are in an excellent position to render decisions about how to improve. Employees act as receptors of information about the outer environment that is very much pertinent for strategy formulation in the future, and involving subordinates as strategists allows organizations to balance strategic planning from a top down, so moving from the general to the specifics, and bottom up approaches, so the opposite, moving from the specifics to the general. So next we turn to the strategy formulation process with a particular applied focus on strategic planning tools. The first part of strategy formulation is to undertake an internal external strategic audit. This should be a major information gathering exercise, both looking inside and outside the organization. What I think this graphic does well is represent how the internal and external analysis conducted in the strategic audit are of equal importance. Okay, it's not that internal problems and constraints take precedent over external trends and uncertainties. You know, as the slide says, virtually everything that happens or can happen outside of your organization may have a significant impact on your future. Alternatively, an internal analysis represents factors over which an organization might have greater or at least more immediate control. But the challenge is securing quality data that can be used to inform strategic decision making. No surprise that the preeminent tool that organizations use as part of the strategic audit is the SWOT analysis. Okay, so something that we are all immensely familiar with. So strengths and weaknesses are internal to the organization. You know, so specifically, strengths are characteristics of a business which give it advantages over its competitors, and weaknesses are characteristics which make it disadvantageous relative to competitors. Then opportunities and threats exist external to the organization, and again, opportunities are elements in a company's external environment that allow it to formulate and implement strategies to increase profitability, and threats are elements that could endanger the integrity and profitability of the business. What I want to do over the next few slides is demonstrate how the SWOT analysis is multi-layered. In other words, there are other tools that can help, say, an organization to understand its external opportunities or its internal weaknesses. And I discuss a selection of those now, in particular those that relate to conducting external analyses. A company can determine which segment is the most viable and suitable by applying 5 criteria, and this is the market segment attractiveness analysis. First, the market must be identifiable, so one needs to consider whether a segment is distinct or overlaps with other segments. Also needs to be reachable, so the best product or service cannot have any impact if that market is not easily accessible or reached through persuasive communications and product distribution. The market must be responsive. So for a segmentation strategy to be successful, customers in the segment must react similarly and positively to a firm's offering. The segment needs to be substantial. So a segment is referred to as substantial if it has significantly large enough potential customers and a likelihood of high growth in the future. And then finally, a segment needs to be profitable. So current and future profitability can be determined by identifying segment size, so that's the number of people in the segment, profit margin percentage, so the selling price minus the variable costs, fixed costs like advertising expenditure. PESTLE is a useful framework to help organizations to determine threats in the external environment. As you can see, PESTLE considers political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. These factors are also extremely fluid in that they can change from strategic planning cycle to strategic planning cycle, so must be conducted on a regular basis. But where do you find PESTLE information? And what I've done, I wish that Frostburg State had something similar, but I've included a link on Canvas to a library site from the University of Houston, Victoria. You will see from this link that, for example, political information can be gained by searching the US government catalogue of publications or even the Homeland Security Digital Library. Likewise, environmental information can quite easily be gained through the US Environmental Protection Agency. Internal analysis and determining strengths and weaknesses is very much determined by the types of data your organization collects and that you have access to as a strategy formulator. However, NRPA recognized that while every community is different, national benchmark data can help to identify the best practices to optimally serve your community and provide context for your community's park metrics. And I've included a link on Canvas to their Creating Equity-Based System Master Plans website, and as part of that resource, and specifically the data collection section, NRPA lists the NRPA park metrics and the Trust for Public Lands ParkServe platform as potentially useful resources to help in the benchmarking process. So once the internal-external strategic audit is complete, it's time to start understanding what actual strategies the organization should implement. Strategic choice refers to the process whereby power holders within organizations decide upon courses of strategic action, and it also involves the evaluation of alternatives, which then leads to a choice. It's about selecting the best strategic option to achieve the organization's objectives. There's another supporting material on Canvas from Kaplan Financial Knowledge Bank, which offers summary detail on the strategic choice process. Specifically, the resource suggests that there are three main areas to consider. First is how to compete, which goes back to Porter's generic competitive strategies. Next is the direction of growth, which is something I'll discuss on the next slide. And finally, there is the method of growth, and within this the choice may be between models involving 100% ownership or a joint strategy, for instance partnerships or alliances. The Ansoff matrix is a tool used by corporations in all industries to understand strategies to achieve growth, and as we saw on the previous slide, is a central part of the strategic choice process. As you can see, the matrix is based around products and markets. As a result, companies can achieve growth with existing products by further penetrating existing markets or moving into new markets. Companies can also develop new products, which are often called brand extensions. Similarly, companies can take these new products to their existing markets or alternatively to entirely new markets. Finally, for a strategy to be successful, it must satisfy three criteria. First is suitability, so that's whether the options are adequate responses to the firm's assessment of its strategic position. Then acceptability, which considers whether the options meet and are consistent with the firm's objectives and are acceptable to the stakeholders. And then third, feasibility, which assesses whether the organization has the resources it needs to carry out the strategy. And a fully elaborated article by Johnson and Scholes on this suitability, feasibility and acceptability model is included on Canvas. So that wraps up the third and final recording of this strategic planning module. If you have any questions about any of the content or assignments, please let me know. All the best.